I grew up with Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it holds a special place in my heart. Nostalgia is certainly a part of that, but it's also an indisputably excellent show. It's incredibly well put together aside from a handful of bad episodes and the shaky start to book 1 where it was still finding its feet. And while I loved it when I was young, I've come to appreciate it even more over the last decade and a half. Naturally, I was excited when the sequel series Legend of Korra was announced, but when I actually watched it, it just didn't quite do it for me. That's not to say I disliked it. I thought there was some excellent stuff mixed in, but it wasn't what I was looking for, and I just couldn't really get myself excited about it the same way I was for Last Airbender. I think that's the case for a lot of people, seeing as opinions on Legend of Korra in the fanbase are so mixed. But it's been 6 years since the show ended, and more like 7 years since I was really paying attention to it, so when Legend of Korra got added back to Netflix, I decided to see if and how my opinions on it had changed. And while I would never say The Legend of Korra is a better show than The Last Airbender, I can say with confidence that I like it more than its predecessor. It's deeper, more complex, and altogether more adult than the original series, but it's also messier, less well constructed, and much less consistent. I was a bit too young to fully appreciate Legend of Korra when it first aired, and now I'm slightly too old to fully connect with some of the issues it brings to the fore. The first 2 books will really connect with people around 16 to 18, while books 3 and 4 will really connect with people around 18 to 20. That's not to say you won't get anything out of it if you aren't in those age groups. In fact, there's a lot to get out of Legend of Korra for anyone who's living in a world that continues to change around them. But many of its themes and characters were built to resonate with that specific age range. Okay, maybe I'm not giving the show a great pitch, so let's switch tack and take a look at villainy, extremism, intent, and how change affects both the world at large and the people in it, as shown throughout Legend of Korra. Avatar: The Last Airbender was produced by Nickelodeon Animation Studio and ran for 3 seasons, or books as they're called in the show, from 2005 to 2008. It takes place in a world inspired by a pastiche of East and South Asia, as well as Arctic cultures. The world is divided into 4 nations, each named after one of the 4 classical elements. Some people in each nation, called benders, have the ability to control the element their nation is named after, with no single person being able to bend more than one of the elements. The exception to this rule is a person called the Avatar, who has the capability to control all 4 elements, and is expected to maintain the peace and balance of the world. To facilitate this frankly unreasonable and perpetual task, the Avatar is reincarnated after every death. The Last Airbender follows the exploits of Aang, the current Avatar and titular Last Airbender, as he seeks to end the imperialism of the Fire Nation by mastering all 4 elements and defeating the Fire Lord. The Legend of Korra is a direct sequel series to Avatar: The Last Airbender that ran from 2012 to 2014. It features the new incarnation of the Avatar, Korra, as she struggles to find her role in an increasingly interconnected and industrialized world. The shows have different themes, tones, and plots, owing in large part to the difference in age of the main characters. Aang and his friends range from 12 to 16 years old, and the story takes place over the course of 1 year. Korra and her friends, meanwhile, are all at least 17, and if you look at the not insubstantial secondary cast, the age range is more like 10 to 60. Additionally, the series takes place over more than 4 years and has a myriad of conflicts and villains during that time. The main threats include Amon, a communist, Unalaq, who can only be described as an evil supremacist, Zahir, an anarchist, and Kuvira, a fascist. But Legend of Korra also has a focus on internal and systemic issues. Failure, PTSD, interpersonal conflict, corruption, and self-doubt, among others, plague Korra and her friends just as much as any of the physical threats. And most of those internal issues result from the fact that each of the external ones are more complex and nuanced than they initially seem. Korra and her friends are teenagers, just coming into their own. And as someone who, regrettably, was once a teenager myself, I know from experience that many of their issues are nearly universal. At that age, you are bombarded with new and complex big ideas, and you start to realize that the moral simplicity of your early life is fundamentally flawed. At the start of the series, Korra is bright-eyed and naive, and she initially thinks that she can solve all the problems of the world just because she's the Avatar. But it quickly becomes clear to her that the so-called bad guys often have legitimate reasons for believing what they do. Each villain in The Legend of Korra hits upon some pressing societal issue, and normal people are drawn to their cause. For Amon, it's the everyday citizens who are frustrated with the imbalance of power. For Zahir, it's the wrongly imprisoned and oppressed. For Kuvira, it's the scared and helpless and the naive. And many of the heroes don't know how to deal with that intertwinement of justification and abuse of power. Asami works with Varric, a skeevy businessman who uses legitimate issues to incite violence and make more money. Mako works for the same police force that utterly failed to address the issues of Republic City, and eventually gets assigned to protect the next monarch of the Earth Kingdom, a narcissistic kid with absolutely no ability to rule a nation. And Bolin happily works for Kuvira because he only sees the help she's giving and none of the brutality or coercion. The show also doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of entering a more adult world. Dealing with Amon and Zahir gives Korra PTSD. She struggles and isolates herself from her friends and family, throwing herself into reckless fights and running away. But even after she rejoins society and begins to feel better, that fear, stress, and anxiety continues to plague her. She deals with it better as time goes on, and even manages to overpower it in some cases, but it never just goes away. Asami has to deal with the fact that her father funded and equipped terrorists. She finds a way to handle becoming the CEO of a now failing business with a tarnished reputation, and after several years, she finally comes to terms with what her father did. Not necessarily forgiving him, but accepting what happened and trying to restore some kind of relationship with him. Add on to all of that the development of romance, and you're left with an utter mess. The romance in Last Airbender is simple and sweet. There are no breakups, no cheating, no fighting, just easy and wholesome. wholesome. Legend of Korra shows the messy teenage side of romance. Mako, Korra, and Asami are in a love triangle that results in a case of cheating and 4 breakups over the course of 1 year, and neither of the relationships ever amount to anything. And Bolin deals with an overly possessive/abusive romance that he barely manages to get out of. But Legend of Korra also shows the happier side of adult relationships. When Bolin starts a much healthier relationship with Opal, they get into a fight but there's no yelling or manipulation, and they make up after Bolin realizes he was wrong, apologizes, and asks unprompted to help Opal with a family problem. And as for Korra, she builds a relationship with Asami over the course of years of friendship and mutual support. Mako, on the other hand, doesn't end up in a romantic relationship at all, and that isn't treated like a bad thing in any way. The Legend of Korra doesn't just stop at its depiction of teenagers and young adults. It also reflects on how personality traits that are funny, useful, or endearing in childhood can become serious problems in adulthood. The main characters in Legend of Korra are 2 generations younger than the ones in Last Airbender, meaning we see how the children of the original cast were affected by their parenting. Aang is a lighthearted and compassionate kid in The Last Airbender, but one with a lot of responsibility. He managed to deal with that responsibility in a way that fit his morals, but when that responsibility was less enormous and immediate and more complex than save the world, he was forced to make some hard decisions with no right answers. As the last person of an entire culture, he had the responsibility to preserve it, and the only way to do that was by having a child with the ability to airbend, then raising that child according to the values of the nearly extinct Air Nation. But he only managed to have a child that could airbend after having 2 others, and he ceased having children once that airbender was born. Aang spent a lot of time with his 3rd child, Tenzin, training him in the ways of the air nomads. But between that singular focus and preserving the peace of the world and forming a new nation, his time was stretched thin enough that he neglected his other 2 kids. Aang and Katara's 2nd child, Kaya, is a waterbender, but their 1st child, Bumi, wasn't a bender at all. Bumi had to deal with the fact that he was not only the 1st child of the Avatar and a master waterbender, but one who inherited neither of his parents' abilities. It's no wonder that he ended up with something of an inferiority complex, a need to be relied upon by his siblings, and a penchant for telling tall tales, droning on and on to make himself seem impressive and useful. Even when things go well for Bumi, when he gets the ability to airbend after the harmonic convergence, it's tinged with sadness. He's finally an airbender like his father always wanted, someone who could truly live up to the legacy of Aang. But Aang isn't alive to see it. And even worse, Bumi has to be an apprentice to Tenzin, his younger brother, who sees him as nothing more than a terrible student, someone who's a worse airbender than Tenzin's 12-year-old daughter. But the often overlooked quality Bumi did inherit from his parents is an ability to inspire and bring people together, something both Aang and Katara were adept at, and something neither Kaya nor Tenzin can do. As for Toph, her upbringing as a young girl with no agency and overprotective parents led to her granting her children Lin and Su an abundance of freedom. While Toph got too much focus and attention from her parents, Lin and Su had to fight for it. Toph was always averse to rules, responsibility, and telling people how to live, so she never did much in the way of actually raising her kids. And she even decided that living as a part of society was too restrictive for her, choosing to abandon her family and live alone in a swamp, an inevitability given her personality and values as a child. The reverse of this less than stellar parenting is seen in Zuko, both the only person of the original cast to have a good and consistently present adult role model in his uncle Iroh, and also the only one who experienced firsthand the trauma that comes from an abusive and troubled family. Zuko's family is so well adjusted that we barely see them, and when we do, they're nothing but loving and supportive. His daughter, Izumi, has less than 5 minutes of screen time and fewer than 100 words of spoken dialogue in all 4 seasons of The Legend of Korra combined. While we do see Zuko and his grandson Iroh II more frequently than we see Izumi, both of their interactions with the characters and plot make it clear that they're well adjusted. Unlike his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, Zuko stepped down as Fire Lord long before he died, leaving the role to Izumi. And while Zuko does take the occasional active role in world affairs, it's only to protect Korra, and when he learns that the Red Lotus is targeting world leaders, he immediately ceases helping Korra and her friends to protect his daughter. The Legend of Korra is disliked by many people, and I can understand where a lot of them are coming from. It's a very different show from The Last Airbender, so anyone who was expecting more of the original were bound to be disappointed. While The Last Airbender can be loved by anyone, both with and without critical analysis, The Legend of Korra is made for a very specific audience, and you need to actively engage with the themes and characters if you want to enjoy it. The show is definitely messy, but so is the world of Avatar, and so are the characters who exist within it. Things aren't simple or easy, and no matter what you do, someone is always going to be disappointed or angry. When Aang and Zuko turned the Fire Nation colonies into the United Republic, they created a place where anyone, regardless of clan or creed, could live in harmony, but the swelling population and rapid technological advancement led to wide-scale organized crime. When Aang took away the bending of the most notorious crime lord, Yakone, he undoubtedly helped many people, but in doing so, he took the law into his own hands, proving that the average citizen had very little to say when it came to their government. When Amon took away the bending of people who abused their abilities, he created a more balanced system of power, but at the expense of the freedom and well-being of many innocent people. When Korra opened the spirit portals, humans and spirits were able to freely interact for the first time in 10,000 years, but the citizens of Republic City hated her for changing and destroying parts of their home. When Zahir killed the Earth Queen, many people who were oppressed and imprisoned rejoiced, but the Earth Kingdom fell into chaos and innocent people were set upon by bandits or had their lives upturned. When Kuvira took control of the Earth Kingdom in the aftermath of the Queen's death, she brought food and peace to many suffering people, but she also ruled with an iron fist and sentenced anyone who got in her way to imprisonment or death. And even though Kuvira was defeated, who knows what will happen now that half of Republic City is destroyed and the Earth Kingdom is once again in the middle of a complicated transition of power. The Last Airbender ended with a resolved conflict and a happier age. The Legend of Korra ends with the main character taking a vacation with her girlfriend. There isn't an end to the issues of the world, and the Avatar can't and shouldn't just magically solve all of them. A single human with a lot of power and clout, deciding what entire nations of people should do and how they should live, describes Korra just as well as it does Amon, Unalaq, Zahir, and Kuvira. The world advances, and so too must we advance with it. Bad things happen, good things happen. Things work, things don't. Life won't stop after some accomplishment, but neither will it end after a setback. Life is messy and difficult and complicated, but there's a lot of fun and beauty and learning to be had. I'll always cherish The Last Airbender for being excellent, but The Legend of Korra has so much more to say, and it's a shame that so many people have overlooked, ignored, and maligned it just because it wasn't what they wanted or they didn't put in the effort to connect with it.